If ever we doubted it before, this is a real war. The exchange of missiles across the Middle East goes on. According to the state media in Iran, more than 1,000 people have now been killed by the American and Israeli attacks so far. Off the coast of Sri Lanka, an Iranian warship was sunk by an American submarine with the loss of perhaps around 100 souls. It's all just a dreadful reminder of how dangerous things are right now. Here, the Prime Minister sticks to his reluctance to join a war of aggression without legal backing and brushes off hostile words from his old friend Donald Trump. Now, that is rallying Labour MPs behind him, but it leaves him open to the more general suspicion that Britain hasn't been keen enough to support our allies or, more generally, serious enough about the need to rearm in dangerous times. Here is the Democratic Unionist MP Gavin Robinson during Prime Minister's questions.
Will the Prime Minister understand that I welcome the commitment for increased defence spending, but if we're only planning to get to 2.5% by 2027, it's not enough. Yeah. It needs to be reconsidered. He needs to go faster where others before him did not. And he needs to take these steps not just for protection of our values across the world, but also for the protection of our consumers who are impacted by this conflict today.
The Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, also challenged Starmer over defence spending. For 14 years, her party, the Conservatives, hollowed out our armed forces. Even so, here and now, she has a point. Where, she asked, was Keir Starmer's defence investment plan? Long promised, but still seemingly stuck inside the Treasury. Good question. Watching this increasingly bloody war in the Middle East reminds us all of the urgency of rebuilding our own depleted defences. Just last month in Munich, the Prime Minister told the world that war with Russia could be only 4 years away. Europe was going through a seismic shift, he said. Time and time again, leaders had looked the other way, only rearming when disaster was upon them, he said. In the 1930s, we were too slow. This time it would be different, he said. Good. Timely warning. But so far, it seems he hasn't found the money for meaningful rearmament. Defence specialists are even worried that the next funding review will mean cuts, not increases, in the army. The subject was barely mentioned in yesterday's spring statement. I'm told the Treasury has tasked people to work on all sorts of innovative schemes, including defence bonds and special kinds of tax. Well, I hope so. Let's hear first tonight from Baroness Cathy Ashton, the Labour peer and former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security. We discussed the pressure on the Prime Minister to go further and faster on defence spending. What did she think?
I think when you look at the situation both in Ukraine, what's now happening in the Middle East, and this general sense of a world that is unstable, it's really important that we go further and faster. I think the Prime Minister would probably agree with that because he's made quite a thing, as he did, I know today, about taking on the responsibility of defence spending. 14 years, he would argue, previous government not doing enough, and so on. But I think anyone really now, considering it very deeply, would be saying, actually, we need to come clean. This needs to go further and faster. So
I'm slightly scratching my head about all of this because I look back to the Prime Minister's speech in Munich last month and it was pretty withering about all the failures that went on in the 1930s. You know, we dithered around, we weren't fast enough, we weren't big enough, we didn't understand what was going on. And he kept saying it's not going to happen this time. And we could be just 3 or 4 years away from a full-scale war with Russia. And yet the defence investment plan is still stuck in the Treasury. We have seen no signs of extra spending above and beyond. It wasn't even mentioned in the spring statement yesterday. I'm scratching my head.
Munich speeches are always interesting because there's a whole different set of audiences. First of all, he would have been talking to, and I was in Munich, the audience in the room and the audience who are most glued to it, which is foreign affairs, defence, military personnel, particularly across Europe and to an extent across the Atlantic, wanting to make clear to them, I think, in that speech, that he was determined, and they should be, that we needed to kind of get together and get our act together. But I wonder, too, if part of the audience wasn't the Treasury, because you always have a domestic sense with these big speeches that you're talking partly to your home base.
And the Prime Minister is, after all, First Lord of the Treasury. He can thump the table and say, do this, and they'll have to do it in the end.
Well, I don't think it's in his nature to kind of thump the table, as far as I can see. But certainly they need to get away from the idea that somehow this is defence or welfare, which I think is where the Conservative leader was coming from today in her questions. But to get to the point of recognising that we're going to have to do quite a lot more and do it quickly if we're going to be ready for the challenges, not just of tomorrow, but actually of today.
Now, there are stories that the Treasury are looking right at the moment at all sorts of unusual options for finding more money for defence, including defence bonds, possibly different kinds of borrowing, possibly some kind of extra tax or input we haven't had before. Do you think it's time to actually come up with a new way to invest in defence much more aggressively?
Well, I think the Treasury are pretty good at being creative when they need to be. My memories of the last 20 or 30 years is when there's been a real need to actually find money for a specific programme, building schools, whatever it is, then they can do that. But they've also got to look at Europe and this whole question of whether we can get involved in what's called SAFE, which is this new fund for Europe. It's very important. Canada's got in on very cheaply. We were offered an extortionate price. I think it's time to also be very clear with our European allies what we need to do with them, because this is about thinking broadly about who should do what. It's not about having a variety of machinery, helicopters, whatever, painted in different colours when you can paint it the same and get the economies of scale and all of that, which when I was in office was a really important part of looking at defence.
Well, I think I'm very glad you mentioned Europe because, of course, for a long time you had an overview of the whole foreign policy and security side of the European project. Now, we do have lots of different kinds of tanks and lots of different kinds of aircraft all competing against each other in Europe. The Americans are not like that. Is this the moment for people talk about, the government generally having to make a further tilt towards Europe? But is this the moment and is this the issue?
So first of all, it's not about a European army before anybody starts thinking about that. That's not going to happen, should not happen. But what you can do is be much more creative about the purchasing of equipment, the making of equipment, so that you're working together collaboratively in order to protect Europe, in order to be able to support missions overseas, to support our allies in NATO and so on. And we've been arguing for years. I've certainly argued for the whole time that I was responsible for some of the defence elements across Europe was we needed to do more in a more clever way, to be more creative about what we do, making sure that we built on the abilities of different countries. There are different nations with a much greater knowledge about seafaring or about working in cold conditions or have a history of being extremely good in the air and so on, that we need to kind of bring together and actually try and consolidate our defence spending in a much more effective way.
Cathy, one of the other things that was brought up in Prime Minister's questions today, including by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, was the danger that we're facing possibly from IRGC sleeper cells or Iranian groups embedded around the West, including in the UK. What's your sense of the nature of the danger we now face as this war gets much bloodier out there?
It's difficult to know. I know that the head of MI5, I think, has been talking about that. So I'm not going to comment on the specifics of it because I simply don't know. But certainly we have to recognise that dangers don't just come from overseas. They can come from home. That those who want to disrupt our lives in cyber attacks or in other ways will try and do so here. So we need to be very vigilant about that. I think the services are very vigilant and are very concerned about it. But also we have to think now in this current situation, of course, about all the people, British nationals living abroad, who find themselves in this extraordinary position that they would not have anticipated even 2 weeks ago.
You said earlier on quite rightly that Keir Starmer isn't a natural desk banger. But is this a moment? Would you now like to see him bang the desk for defence spending?
I think he has to in the short run and in the long run. I think he also has to lay it out in terms of what I call the vision thing, which is also putting it in the context of the bigger story about the UK. Because it's not about frightening people. It's not about saying, you should be very scared. It's about saying, let's be realistic. There are significant threats at our door. There are things that we have to tackle. Therefore, we should get on with it and do it properly in the context of wanting to see a strong economy, of seeing people as living standards grow and all of that. So it feels like a comprehensive story.
Cathy Ashton, Baroness Ashton, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, one senior defence guy I was speaking to this afternoon said that as the British government struggled with how to raise defence spending, they should never forget, quotes, the Americans will be watching like hawks. On that note, let's turn to Donald Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor, Victoria Coates, now Vice President for National Security at the Heritage Foundation. Victoria, great to have you back on the show. The Prime Minister in the House of Commons today kind of brushed aside what Donald Trump had said about him being nothing like Winston Churchill and said the special relationship was terribly deep, very, very strong, and we shouldn't judge it by the individual words of a president at one time or another. Do you think he was being a little bit over-optimistic?
Well, Andrew, great to see you. I think that, this has not been a great weekend for the special relationship. I think everyone in the United States was deeply disappointed by the restrictions Prime Minister Starmer put on the use of our bases in Diego Garcia, for example, on Cyprus and in the UK itself, only for defensive maneuvers. I think that was unnecessary. I think it was appeasement towards Iran, which is not going to work. And he is also not doing himself any favors with these remarks in the House of Commons today. I agree with Baroness Ashton. I mean, this is not enough for defense spending. 2.5 by 2027 isn't enough because the United States is going to need Europe to take care of Europe going forward.
So this is not just a momentary irritation in Donald Trump's mind. It's about the nature of the relationship between the UK and the US and the ability of Britain to be able to hold its end up when it comes to a dangerous world.
I would say it is about the very feckless policies of a specific prime minister. President Trump is an Anglophile. He has businesses in England and, is very, very fond of the United Kingdom. So this is not a reflection on how he sees the UK, but a reflection that he is deeply concerned by the condition of the British armed forces. He is concerned that these investments are not being made. And as I said, our primary challenge is China. And if we are the ones who are going to have to take on the People's Republic of China, we for sure are going to need Europe to be able to take on Russia. And so that's where we stand right now. And it's very, very disturbing to Americans to have Europeans, going to The Hague, making pledges at NATO summits, but then not following through on them.
You call the Prime Minister here feckless. Do you think there's any way back for him into Donald Trump's affections? Or do you think he's made his choice now, and that's it?
No, I've seen President Trump, reverse course on these kinds of relationships. He knows how important the U.S.-UK alliance is, and he has gone out of his way over the course of the first year of his second term to make this work. And I actually thought that first visit in the Oval Office in January of last year of 2025 was going to be a disaster, and it actually went great. That's when the Prime Minister brought the invitation from King Charles, very well received. We had the second state visit. This can work, but not if Prime Minister Starmer is behaving the way he has over the last 3 days.
Can I ask for your view about where the end game in all of this could be? Because I've just been looking through the reports about who might be taking over as supreme leader in Iran now. And the key character seems to be Mojtaba Khomeini, the son of the previous Ayatollah. And, he has just lost his mother, his father, his wife, his sister, his brother-in-law, and his niece. He's very close to the IRGC. This, if anything, is going to be an even more anti-Western leader. So how long does this go on? Do we just keep decapitating one after another until we get somebody we can tolerate?
Well, that does seem to be something of a pattern here. And Mojtaba also was wounded in the first attack, and so I'm not sure I would give him very long in terms of life expectancy on the ground in Tehran. But also important, yes, he's close to the IRGC, but he's deeply unpopular. He's known to be extremely corrupt. The Iranian people are sick of that, of the mullahs and their offspring lining their pockets with all of the revenues from oil and gas, while they are literally starving. They're running out of food. They're running out of cash. So it may not be the United States or Israel who takes him out.
And maybe somebody else entirely. President Trump said a couple of days ago that he had in mind acceptable leaders to take over in Iran, but unfortunately most of them were dead, and then the second lot were dead as well. Is there any sense in Washington about who might take over and be acceptable?
Well, I think the other thing the president has said, though, is that this also needs to be something that's coming from the Iranian people themselves, that he is not as interested in what we would think of as regime change in terms of imposing somebody from the outside or imposing a system from the outside. I think we've learned that lesson from Iraq. We're not terribly good at that. I think his goal is to neutralize what he judged to be an intolerable threat to the United States and, by the way, to our allies in the form of the Islamic Republic. And so, he is systematically going through and neutralizing that threat, the missiles, the nuclear program, the regional proxies. And so that no longer is a problem for the American people. But he's also said, this is going to be the optimal opportunity for the people of Iran to take back their government. And so we'll see if they seize that.
Victoria, final question. Looking at the markets, there's a certain sort of calm beginning to spread through some of them, at least, probably driven by a sense that this is not going to go on forever. And there are also reports that the numbers of Iranian missiles hurling out of Iran have come down substantially. They may be running out of missiles. Do you see this as a conflict with only a few days or weeks to go rather than months and months?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what the trajectory is now. Of course, that can always change, and we are seeing spectacular attempts by the Iranians to hit Turkey, for example, or our consulate in Dubai or our embassy in Riyadh. That is a problem. That's bad. We have to guard against it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think they're down about 75% from where they started, and they started at a level that was lower than they were firing during the 12-day war. So they are running out of capacity. And the United States is just getting more capacity because as we've degraded their missile defense systems, we now don't have to use entirely stealth aircraft over Iran. We can use whatever aircraft we want, and that expands our ability to hit targets.
Really interesting. Victoria, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to LBC tonight. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Now, the Pentagon has vowed to strike deeper with Iran after sinking one of their warships. I'm going to be talking to a former senior NATO general to get his reaction onto how this war is playing out right now. But the time is 6:18.
App. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
In terms of the war itself, it's been a dramatic day, above all perhaps because of the sinking of the Iranian frigate, the Dina, by an American submarine off the coast of Sri Lanka, one of 20 Iranian ships the US says it's sunk so far. I'd like to get a military perspective on what's been going on from General Sir Richard Shirreff, the former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe and author of War with Russia. Richard, thank you very much indeed for coming on this show. Can I start off by asking how long you think this is going to go on for in what we call a kinetic, that's a bangs and explosions kind of way? Because it does seem that the Iranians are beginning to run out of missiles.
Your previous guest made that pretty clear, but I suspect this thing will run on much longer than anticipated. It may be that the Iranians are running out, are running short of ammunition. But what is missing completely from any discussion coming from the other side of the Atlantic is any clarity of strategy, any clarity of end state, or it seems any understanding of the impact of what they're doing on the minds of the Iranian people. Because if they haven't thought that through, and it looks as if they haven't, they are most likely to be pushing the moderate secular Iranians into the arms of the extremists and the hardliners.
Yeah.
And I would highlight particularly in that respect the assassination of Khamenei. I mean, it may have sounded great on American networks and in Israel, but the reality is that Khamenei was not just the Iranian head of state. He was a religious symbol. He was a religious symbol for worldwide Shiites. And by assassinating him, he is now effectively a martyred saint. And that is, frankly, about as subtle as murdering the Pope on the steps of St. Peter's. And the Americans need to have thought all this through, and the fact that they haven't, I think is a real worry, a real indicator that this thing could well turn into something like Iraq to the power of 10.
Richard, I'd like to follow through on that because it's a very interesting point. Hasn't been made enough, I don't think. So Machaba, his son, is, we are told, likely to take over. But as I was saying to Victoria Coates, he's just lost his mother, his father, his wife, and most of the rest of his family. And he was already a hardliner. So this is not going to be a more pro-Western regime if that's what happens. And then you think of the sinking of this ship today. I think 87 bodies, the Sri Lankans say, have been recovered, but there's about 150 people missing in total. That's the kind of thing that the Iranians are never going to forget or forgive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, let's put this ship sinking into perspective. It's a tactical operation, as have been all the bombing and the thumping of Iranian facilities and the umpteen thousands of missions and sorties that have taken place. Tactics are all very well, but unless they are linked to a clear strategy, they're frankly counterproductive, or can be counterproductive. And that's my point. No strategy, and yet again an American president who has embarked on a war of choice, a war of hubris, without any thought of a clear end state. And I think that is something we've got to be very, very leery about. And I would also push back against your previous guest's assumption that Trump has only got a whistle and the British come to his heel.
Well, on that again, Prime Minister, very, very clear today again, he was not going to take us into a war of aggression unless he was clear there was a legal basis for it. He felt there wasn't a legal basis for it. He argues you can't impose democracy by throwing missiles at people, and he was going to have no part of it. Given what you've said, do you think he's right? Do you think we are well out of this?
I think he is right, but I would also just add one point, which is that our hands are in the mangle now. I mean, it's all very well saying that Americans can use British bases for defensive measures. Frankly, defensive, offensive, there's no distinction. It's war. And that will be perceived by the Iranians as siding with the Americans. For my money, I think Britain should be coming together with other middle powers, Canada, Australia, Germany, France, Italy, other Europeans, to protect our own interests. We've got to protect our bases, we've got to protect our people, and we've got to support our allies, such as the Gulf states, who are getting thumped by Iranian missiles. But we do not want to get involved with the sort of gung-ho craziness of Trump and Hexith, which is going to lead to, I think, to a very, very prolonged, nasty state of affairs. And it's already caused chaos, and it will continue to cause chaos.
Hear, hear. General Sir Richard Shirreff, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. I'm trying to come at this story from as many angles as I can think of. So let's not forget that the protests against this regime began with women tearing off their chadors and confronting the Basij militias. I'm joined now by Dr. Roya Rastaga, an American-Iranian filmmaker and executive director of the Iranian Diaspora Collective. Dr. Roya, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what's your sense of what's going on inside Iranian civil society, if I can put it that way, as this war goes on? Lots of people are very frightened, but do you think they are going to rally to the regime the more Iranians are killed, or do you think the regime is genuinely tottering?
Oh, I think the regime is definitely tottering. The people inside of Iran have done everything they can for the last 47 years to show that they are not represented by this government. And this government at this point is illegitimate. It has used the most extreme and lethal force against its citizens. And women and civil society in general in Iran is ready to be done with this regime completely. And so I think, the mood inside of the country, I think, is very grave. I think we saw some celebration when Khamenei was killed. But I think I know people are still grieving and traumatized from the very intense massacre that happened on January 8th and 9th. Conservative estimates put it at 30,000. And people are also now scared, and the currency collapsed. So people are having a hard time eating. Right now, I'm hearing that there's reports that water might soon start to be cut off. Tehran right now is under martial law. I think the conditions are very tight for Iranians, but I do not think that Iranian civil society will rally behind this regime in any case. They are done with this regime.
I suppose what a lot of people looking from the outside fear, and I'm certainly one of them, is that lots and lots of brave democracy campaigners, lots of women, lots of students, lots of people get out onto the streets because they're encouraged that the regime is coming to the end. But actually, it's the Basij militias and it's the IRGC who still have the weapons, still have the infrastructure, and are able to produce the most bloodthirsty repression. And, in history, sometimes repression works.
You're exactly right. It does. And it should not. And the world has a responsibility to protect Iranian civil society. And Iranian people, Iranian women have been protesting. They have gone to the streets. They have tried reform. They have tried many different things over the last 47 years. And this regime is not tenable. It must go. And I think the people on the ground are saying that very, very clearly. They knew the risks going out. I don't think anyone knew that it would be a massacre of that proportion.
Yes.
But they knew there would be risks, and they still went out. And I think because President Trump called people to go to the streets, he does have a responsibility now to protect civilians and Iranian civil society.
So, Raya, does that mean that we are moving, or the Americans must be moving in due course to boots on the ground? Because if, we, the West, decapitate the regime and encourage people, and we then see horrendous things happening inside the country as a result, do we not then have a kind of moral responsibility to go further?
So I am not a military strategist, and I need to say that. But what I will say is that the American and the Israeli military technology, is some of the most sophisticated in the world. I think that they can be very precise in their strikes. I think they need to focus on regime targets, regime bases, military bases, military communication and surveillance systems. And I also think that communication needs to be reinstated for people inside of Iran. That is something that the West can do. That is a form of intervention, to be able to reinstate communication. Yeah. They're in the middle of a 107-hour now blackout. And I think that Iranians on the ground have been very clear about a transitional leader that they want to come in. That is Reza Pahlavi. Reza Pahlavi has said many times he does not want a restoration of the monarchy. He does not want the crown. He wants to be able to a bridge to democracy. But definitely the West would have a responsibility to be able to fortify his return.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that, and with helicopters coming down and supporting protesters if they were to go back into the streets, so that if the police try to, again, attack the protesters, attack the brave people in Iran who are fighting for democracy, they will be, the military and the police against the people will be shut down.
Okay, such a lot to think about there. Dr. Roya Rastaga, thank you so much for talking to us. Really interesting. Now then, as the US-Israeli war with Iran enters its fourth day, questions have been raised about whether this conflict could heighten the risk of terrorist threats here on British soil. How worried should we be? Time now 6:31, and Matt Hewitt has the news headlines.
Must be one.
Yes, Lotto from the National Lottery. It could be you. Estimated jackpot. Rules apply. 18+.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:34. Now, earlier in the week, you might recall the Defence Minister, Al Khan's, told me about the potential threat of Iranian terror attacks on British soil. Just have a listen.
We've disrupted 20 Iranian terrorist threats in this country. And it's just another example of the Iranian regime that has been, I always say, the keystone of instability within the Middle East.
The keystone of instability. Well, there may be serious trouble to come from sleeper cells and IRGC fighters. How worried should we be? Nigel Inkster was the Director of Operations and Intelligence for MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service, and he joins me now. Nigel, it's great to have you on the show. We know that the IRGC is a bit like a sort of spider's web of cells and supporters all around the world, including in the UK. So, straightforward question, should we be alarmed and worried about this?
Well, we have to be aware of the threat from Iran in this context, but looking at this in the context of the hostilities that are happening at the moment, I think it's probably safe to say that at this point, Iran doesn't want to spread the conflict beyond the immediate zone in the Middle East. There's no sign of that at the moment. The question is how this conflict plays out. And I happen to think that the most likely scenario is that it will be a period of kinetic conflict, at the end of which the US and Israel will probably run out of legitimate targets to attack and may even run out of ammunition. And I think that is the point at which the Iranian regime may switch to a more asymmetric approach, and that is the time at which we may expect to see terrorist incidents taking place across a wider spectrum than currently.
Yeah, following on from that, because the more we decapitate and take out Iranian leaders of different kinds, there is the possibility it becomes a more democratic pro-Western country, but there's also the possibility that it becomes ever harder line, ever more desperate, ever angrier, and ever more prepared to lash out. And in those circumstances, what do you know? What do you think about the fact that there will be Iranian groups waiting to be used if that happens?
Well, I don't know the specifics. You'd have to talk about that with the Director of MI5, Director General of MI5. But it's clear that, as your earlier speaker quoted, there have been numerous examples of attempted Iranian plots here in the UK, and I think that we can expect, in that situation, we can expect terrorist attacks to be part of the regime's toolkit. And in particular, bear in mind that they will want to avenge the death of Ayatollah Khamenei. That will be at the top of their to-do list. And of course, that doesn't affect the UK directly because we, by no stretch of the imagination, can be considered responsible for that. But, it remains the case that in the Iranian imagination, we are the small Satan to the United States' great Satan.
Absolutely. And by going for assassination as a tactic, then do we not open ourselves to them saying, OK, well, if it's OK for you to assassinate our leaders, then it's fair enough for us to try to assassinate yours?
Yes, in a word, I think that is true.
All right, Nigel Inkster, thank you very much indeed for that crisp and clear answer. Now, we've heard already this week about the spike in gas and oil prices as a result of the conflict, but how are the markets reacting around the world and what could the economic impacts be for us here at home? Let's turn now to Ed Conroy, the economics editor at Sky News. Ed, great to have you on the show. So markets have been all over the place today. People are trying to find safe havens and not finding them very easily.
I think everyone's trying to work out, as you were kind of talking about with Nigel there, there's such divergent paths that could potentially kind of unfold in the coming weeks and months. And I think everyone kind of assumes, OK, this is going to last for a few weeks and it's going to be bumpy over that period. But there's a kind of, an optimistic path where maybe you have kind of regime change in Iran and actually things calm down. But then there's this rather more kind of scary path, which says that the Straits of Hormuz are kind of shut down for a long period. I mean, they're kind of quasi-shut down at the moment. We've never really seen anything quite like that before. And we have quite recent intimate experience of what happened in Ukraine and how that's fed through. And, at Sky, I've been kind of putting together charts that look scarily reminiscent of the charts, we were showing of that period there.
So let me pick up on that, because seems to be the case that what happens is you get a spike in energy prices. I think Qatar have closed, I think, the world's largest energy.
Ras Laffan, which is the world's biggest gas terminal. I was there kind of not long ago, and it is there is no place on the planet that has as big a store of energy. There's nowhere else. It is like the single biggest place. It is this big gas field called the North Field, which is just there in the middle of the Gulf and actually shared by Iran and Qatar. Them shutting that down is one of the biggest, scariest things you can possibly imagine to happen. And that's partly why you see gas prices, spot prices at least, going up by kind of, more than 100% or so at one point. And then oil prices aren't going up by quite as much at the moment.
So what happens is that happens, and then that feeds into the economies generally. It feeds into inflation. It feeds into all sorts of, heavy energy-using companies and industries who start to suffer from that, and then to the rest of us.
That's right. It's in a sense, it's even more. There's even more chains in it than that. But yeah, broadly speaking, basically, if you're not able to get the gas out of the ground so easily, or in this case, you're not able to both get it out of the ground and get it onto tankers and then get it through the Straits of Hormuz, then you don't have as much gas floating around the world in these tankers, and then you basically have this big gap. And previously, we had to contend with the gap where Russia once was. Now, and at that point, everyone was saying, well, it's okay because we can, this is 3-4 years ago, we can just get a bit more liquefied natural gas from America, and we can get more gas from Qatar. And Qatar was seen as the safe place, the safest bet when you needed extra gas. And here in the UK, we don't get that much from Qatar, but we were expecting potentially to get more in the coming years. In fact, by 2035, we were contracted to get more gas from Qatar than we were from the North Sea.
So, Ed, I think this afternoon, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was sitting with a whole bunch of oil and gas executives in Whitehall. Will she have been saying to them, can you get us more? Can you change the maths when it comes to what we're getting? What can I do for you, she may be saying.
I suspect, I know from having spoken to people behind the scenes, there is nervousness within government that wasn't evident from the events that we saw yesterday in the spring forecast. They are nervous about this because everyone knows institutionally, as you were saying, that the knock-on effect, you have higher gas prices, wholesale gas prices, then months later you potentially have higher bills, and then months after that you potentially have higher food prices, because higher gas prices mean higher fertilizer prices, which mean higher food prices. So the tricky thing is she can have as many meetings as she likes, but we are a big gas importer right now and a big energy importer, and even if you're going to kind of gradually encourage people to drill more in the North Sea, it still will take years before we have any impact to that.
Yeah. Well, what I do know is that Donald Trump has the midterm elections coming ahead, and he's got all these problems too. So let's hope his instinct is to close this down as soon as is humanly possible before we get that big sort of recession-type impact. But Ed Conway, Sky News economics editor, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to us about that. And do pick up, by the way, his book, Mineral World 2. I have actually read it, and it's jolly good. Now, if it hadn't been for the war, we would have been talking endlessly about the battering Labour got at the recent by-election and the prospects for the May round of elections. There, the fight for the Senedd, the Welsh Assembly, will be a crucial marker of whether reform is continuing to make progress in British politics. The party that sees itself as reform's main opponent is Plaid Cymru, whose leader, Rhys Iorwerth, spoke to me earlier on. Where did he see the party's relative standings as we head towards those elections?
Well, I think it's becoming very clear that it's a two-horse race now, with the old politics falling so far behind. That's as true for Labour now as it is for the Conservatives, down on sort of 10% in the polls regularly. So it's a two-horse race between two very, very different visions of Wales. It's that hopeful vision of Plaid Cymru for building a nation, or it's that division-based future offered by reform. Our job is to make sure that Wales hopefully chooses the right path.
If you talk to Reform, they think they're going to do really well in Wales, and this might be their breakthrough moment. They might even form the government there.
Well, I think it's clear that they will do well, because what we have is a global phenomenon of the growth of the populist right, and it's right that we recognise the threat that poses to us in Wales. It happens to go by the name of Reform in Wales, and our job is to stop that. We know they will be in the Senedd in some numbers, but we have to make sure that Plaid Cymru becomes the largest party so that we can actually have a government that is intent on building a better future and getting to grips with the issues that hold us back.
Well, let me ask you a bit about that, because the manifesto, as it's emerging, you talk about things like surgical hubs and the importance of libraries in schools, and that's very important. But independence is not something you have given much thoughts? I mean, it's all over the conference. We see the word everywhere in Welsh, but we don't yet know what your plan is for independence.
What do you mean by it being all over the conference in Welsh?
Well, it's on T-shirts and it's on hats and...
Well, I'll talk about independence. I believe in independence. I believe Wales should be an independent country. But because I think independence, that's a debate about Wales being able to fulfil its potential. Now, I believe that's the path. But this election isn't about that. We've said there won't be a referendum in this coming term. And that's why it's about dealing with those fundamental
I'm sorry
issues.
to jump in, Reen, but my question is, in a sense, why not? Because if you look to Scotland, it's pretty clear. If the SNP do very well, if they win, they want to push very, very hard for another independence referendum. Why are things different in Wales?
Because we are on two very different constitutional journeys. We're two very distinct countries. I believe in the people of Wales, and as much as I believe in independence for Wales, I don't want to impose that. I want to get Wales excited about the potential that comes from taking the levers of change into our own hands. Now,
it's not excited now.
I don't think. Well, to put it in plain terms, if there was a referendum now, I don't think we would win that referendum. But at the core of this is my belief in the future of my nation, and my belief that we have been held back by somehow having an arbitrary level of ambition, a ceiling set for us as a nation that we need to break through. But that's in the hands of the people of Wales, not about me imposing it somehow.
If you're able to achieve a Plaid government in May, do you think that will then take Wales to a position where it's ready for independence or an independence referendum?
Well, I think it would be a very important moment in the history of Wales in terms of growing confidence in our nationhood. But we want to get to grips right now with the problems of the health service and education and creating a stronger economy.
It's a medium to long-term aspiration, then.
Well, it's in the hands of the people of Wales. This isn't something that is an electoral tactic of mine. This is something that I have always believed in. I believe in the people of Wales and trusting them to decide what kind of future we want to build for ourselves. I will try to persuade and make people more confident. And a part of that is showing that we're a good government. We want better government for Wales under Plaid Cymru, getting to grips with health, education, the economy, with this generous child care offer that we're putting on the table. These are really important things. But so also is thinking, is there a better way that we can run our nation?
Let me ask you about the big issue of the day, which is, of course, the war going on in the Middle East. The Prime Minister has told the House of Commons that international law is sacrosanct, and for that reason, although British forces will be in action to defend our own people like the 300,000 British people in the region, and our allies, we will not be part of the war of offence, as it were, engaged by Israel and the United States. What's your view?
Many people, of course, will be worried that we are now a part of this and have been drawn into this by virtue of the fact that bases in the United Kingdom are being used by the United States. There's not, and most people listening to this will be deeply worried about what's been happening over the past couple of days. And by the way, we can absolutely condemn the brutal regime that has been punishing its own people in Iran for so long, and at the same time condemn unilateral US and Israeli action, which is contrary to international law. And the danger from the beginning was that other states would be brought in, just as Britain has now.
If it's a bad and dangerous regime, isn't the moral imperative to try to get rid of it?
That is something that a lot of people will be asking themselves about now. There'll be people who are very, very happy that the leader of Iran is no longer there to punish his people day in, day out. But the regime persists. And what's worrying is that there clearly is no plan for what happens next. What is the plan for peace? What was meant to happen that would somehow give an assurance of regime change? The regime hasn't changed. And now the UK, like other nations, have been brought into this. And British citizens are at risk in the Middle East.
Well, that's a very important question you ask at the end there, Reen. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. We don't often see you in the studio, so it's great to have a conversation when you can. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.
A former Labour advisor married to a Labour MP is among 3 people arrested on suspicion of spying for China. I'm going to be talking to LBC's political editor to get the latest on that. The time now is 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Cross question. 6:51, and now for something completely different. Jonathan Ashworth, the former Labour MP, former Work and Pensions Shadow Secretary, called me last week with a piece of news, and he's now made it public. Aged only 47, over the new year he suffered from a stroke. Now, as some of you may know, I myself had a major stroke about 15 years ago, so I had an inkling of what he's been going through. He came in to tell me exactly what happened.
Well, I was hit by a bolt of lightning on New Year's Day. I woke up in the early hours, 4 or 5 o'clock, something like that, with these pins and needles and stiffness all down my left side. I naturally, at first thought, I slept in a slightly awkward manner, tried to sort of sleep it off and assumed it would resolve. Hours later, no, I still had these very, very intense pins and needles and stiffness. I thought, this isn't right.
Any flashes of light or headaches?
No, so I thought I was having a heart attack because, I mean, I was a Shadow Health Secretary for a long time, so I'm not clinically trained, but when you're a Shadow Health Secretary, you get used to
people talking about these things.
Yeah, and this is a heart attack. Because I didn't have any flash of light. I didn't lose my speech. There was no sense my face was dropping or anything like that. I thought, is this a heart attack? So I rang 111, who immediately said, we're sending an ambulance for you, who turned up pretty quickly. Well done, West Stream, getting the ambulance service. Good speedy response from them. So this is on New Year's Day. So thank you for all the NHS staff working on New Year's Day. And they rushed me, blue lighted me all the way to the emergency stroke clinic at the hospital in Leicester.
It's funny, it brings you back. I had mine overnight. I'm not going to be competitive, but I think mine was slightly worse than yours. Yeah. Certainly the deficits, as they call them, were worse. But I was blue lighted to Charing Cross Hospital first thing in the morning, not having any clue what was going on. How much about stroke did you know before it happened to you?
Well, I knew a bit about it from my time as Shadow Health Secretary, because although when you're the Shadow Health Minister or a Health Minister, you're not clinically trained, you're not a clinician, but when you're dealing with health policy, you just learn about health-related things. So I knew about it, but I didn't think I was having a stroke because the symptoms, as they presented themselves to me, I thought it might be a heart attack. I didn't have any facial drop. I hadn't lost my speech and language.
It is difficult. Every stroke obviously is very different because I thought I was having a migraine. I had extraordinary flashes and colours of flashing lights and all the rest of it, and then woke up in the morning unable to move on the left side. So we know that the possibilities that people need to think about are periods of great stress in life. Very high blood pressure, in my case, very high cholesterol, which I was ignoring. I knew there was a problem, but I just wasn't going to the doctor as I should have been. What was your story?
Well, it turns out I had dangerously high blood pressure, which I had no idea about, because typically, like I'm sure this will be the case for a lot of the listeners, is that whenever I'd get the message from the GP saying you're due your NHS checkup, I'm 47, I was too busy, I'll do it next week, I'll sort it out next week.
Yeah, I was the same.
And I was 47, I've never smoked, I've never lived in fear of that question some politicians live in fear of. Have I ever taken any illegal substance? I haven't. Listeners might think what a boring nerd he was at university, but that's the truth.
The occasional gin and tonic?
I have had the occasional gin and tonic, but I do lots of running. I do lots of marathon running and things like that for charity. So I just kept putting it off. I kept thinking, I'm healthy. Nothing like this would ever possibly happen to me. I had no idea my blood pressure was so high. So get your blood pressure checked if you're listening to this.
The overwhelming message is go to the doctor, get your blood pressure checked, get your cholesterol pressure checked. Don't take it for granted. And there's things called TIAs, transient ischemic attacks, which are like mini strokes. I had a couple, but you didn't have that.
No, we're not identified anything like that. No, this has just hit me. They did the CT scans and the MRI scans on my brain. They showed me the sort of black blob on my brain where it hit my brain cells. But they didn't reassure me. And this is the extraordinary thing, because you did the book and the documentary about the brain, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
About how the brain can rewire.
It can if you're lucky. I mean, I was very shocked when you called me, I think, last week, and you told me about it. I didn't say anything, but you've now gone public about it. Why did you do that? Simply, Shadow Health Secretary, you want to get the health message out there? Because
I think there's a couple of things. I want to get the message out there that people need to check their blood pressure. I was taking it for granted, and do not take it for granted. The Stroke Association say that every 5 minutes somebody will have a stroke. So
if you're listening out there, just think about that.
And that is, given sort of levels of unhealthiness, obesity in the population, that's likely to rise to every 3 minutes over the next 10 years. Because people are not taking their blood pressure seriously. So please get your blood pressure checked. And although I didn't need it, we still don't have this very important procedure called a thrombectomy in every stroke unit in the country 24/7. We need that. We don't want a postcode lottery in stroke services. So I want to use my experience to campaign for better stroke services.
Very important indeed. And Jonathan, final crucial question: how are you now?
I'm okay. I've still got a sort of persistent stiffness in my left side. My hand is better, but my arm is still stiff. I got my hand moving by doing my daughter's Lego sets. They're very much into Wicked themed Lego at the moment, but I've lost some vision in my left eye, but I'm still here.
I can see your hands working much better than mine does. And I gather you're going to run a marathon, which is pretty impressive.
Well, that's my aim, to get back to running a marathon. That's what I want to do.
And how are you going to keep your blood pressure down now?
Well, I'm on the tablets. I'm on, I'm on, blood thinners, statins. Take them every day. And I mean, the truth is, I used to eat fruit and vegetables. I did a lot of running. So I think, but the blood pressure tablets really have brought my blood pressure right down. And hopefully my cholesterol down as well.
What's been the effect on the family?
Well, I think the family have been brilliant. It's at times like these, it's such a cliche thing to say, but at times like these, you do really, really rely on your family, your partner, and your close friends. People do really rally around. And obviously, I want to thank the NHS, because it was New Year's Day. I mean, most of the country are sleeping off their New Year's Eve party, whereas the NHS, the paramedics, 111, were there for me on New Year's Day. So thank you to the NHS. And if I ever go back into politics, maybe I will one day, who knows? I'll be fighting for the NHS.
Well, Jonathan, well done, and the very best of British.
Thank you.
Let's end tonight with a Westminster story. It seems that 3 people have been arrested on charges of spying for China, and one of them is the husband of the Labour MP for East Kilbride, Joni Reid. LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, is across the story.
Yes, Andrew. So earlier today, police told us that they've arrested 3 people as part of a counter-terror probe into suspected breaches of the National Security Act. They clarified it was in relation to China. Those 3 have now been detained and taken into police custody, where we understand they remain currently. Officers also carried out searches at those 3 locations and 3 other addresses in London, East Kilbride and in Cardiff. And LBC can confirm, as you say, that one of those who has been arrested is David Taylor. He is the husband of sitting Labour MP Joni Reid. She is the MP, as you say, for East Kilbride, first elected in 2024. But she has issued a statement today which says, "I've never seen anything to make me suspect that my husband has broken any law. I'm not part of my husband's business activities. We understand this to be lobbying, and neither I nor my children are part of this investigation." But of course, Andrew, it will be incredibly worrying for many MPs today. It comes, of course, after the collapse of the trial of 2 other men accused of spying for China, Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, last year. Both men denied wrongdoing at the time. The CPS said there wasn't enough evidence to continue with that prosecution. Earlier today, Dan Jarvis updated MPs on the case and said any of them with concern should contact the authorities.
I think that is what we call technically a marmalade dropper. And Natasha Clark, thank you very much indeed. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news and videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up for 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.
To refit.
We look weak, we look foolish, frankly, we look pathetic in the eyes of not only the world, but more importantly, our enemies. Is this final proof that we need to increase defence spending to fund getting our military into a functioning state again? On Cross Question 8, Labour MP David Pinch